All praises to the Most High Yahweh Bashem and Hawashai, Bahashem Racha Kwadash. Double honors to the elder apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well. Peace and salutations to the hopeful elect, scattered throughout the four corners of the earth, laboring in his truth in all sincerity. Matthew 12:25, KJV. And Yahushua knew their thoughts, and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand.
And here's the harsh, cold reality, folks. I touched on it at the beginning. But this is a time of choosing. There will not be a multicultural U.S. There will not be an America that would be recognizable to our founders that consists of traditional Americans, white, first world, high IQ, high trust people, and millions of Indians, cultural Indians, whatever their technical citizenship, millions of cultural Somalians, whatever their technical citizenship, millions of Haitians or Venezuelans or Sudanese or any third world country. No such culture can exist. It's not possible. Multiculturalism cannot work and have a cohesive society. Each of those communities turns on the other because we live in a world of scarce resources, and there is no broader connectivity across them. In the context of Europe and America, and I'm afraid Europe's already lost, somebody is going to get ethnically cleansed. Someone has to leave. We can't all live together. There are irreconcilable differences. We have to have a cultural and, by extension, a racial divorce in America. The only question is who's going to be cleansed? Is it going to be white people eradicated from America? America's no longer a first world nation. We're degraded to third world status. That's one option. That's one path I can see happening. Or the only other alternative to that is this remigration, this cleansing of America of these third worlders. I know it's racist. I know. I don't care. Those are the only two possible outcomes. Somebody is getting ethnically cleansed. The only question is who?
Okay, that was Andrew Braca from the Andrew Braca Show. And you see his Twitter handle there at The Braca Show. He has approximately 141.5K. He has 141,500 followers approximately. And as it states here, Andrew Braca, attorney providing pro-America, pro-Constitution, pro-Western civilization, political and legal analysis, and bonus jokes and laughter. So that's if you want to check his page out. I'm just giving him credit for using his video here as one of the talking points to my video that I'm about to make now. My video is not necessarily a response to what he's saying or a response to his actual video. I'm going more along with biblical prophecy here. So with that being said, we know that there's 3 stages to a chess game: the opening, the middle game, and the end game. So America, aka Babylon the Great, is in the end game stage right now. The opening would obviously coincide with the exploration era when Europeans so-called discovered what became known as the Americas, the eventual settling and colonization of these lands, the transatlantic slave trade, the 7-Year War, better known as the French and Indian War, and obviously the American Revolution as well. The middle game would consist of the so-called Spanish-American War, the Gullah Geechee Wars, better known as the Seminole Wars, the Civil War itself, the abolishment of chattel slavery, the formation of the Republican Party, which they say was created to end slavery. That's what they say. And ultimately, the Southern Dixiecrats would eventually come out and be known as the Democrats, who we know them as today, which is the party of slavery, Jim Crow, among other things. Uh, the formation of the Federal Reserve Bank and the IRS, along with the first two woes from the book of Revelation, the first two world wars, would also be part of that middle game as well. The end game starts with this truth and the Great Awakening around the mid to late 60s. And the difference between the first Civil War and this next one that is currently brewing is the first one ironically made this one whole country. Officially, there was no more Union states versus Confederate states, except only in ideology. But this second Civil War is going to be way more broad-based. This one is going to involve foreigners who are already on the land. So Esau knows this is his last stand. They still regard America as that last great beacon of hope. And as you heard in the opening video I played, the gentleman stated that he fears that Europe has already been lost. And right now I'm really only speaking of the common, everyday Joe Schmo American Edomite, not the elite ruling class. When I say that, they still regard this as, America as the last great beacon of hope. The elite ruling class, they actually want complete control even over the average everyday Joe Schmo Edomite as well. And so, that goes into this second verse here. When you look at Matthew 12, I'll read 25 again, then I'll go into 26. As Yahushua knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? And it goes, basically what I just said. The elite ruling class, they don't just want to control everyone else. They want total control over their own Joe Schmo Edomite population as well. So that's Satan casting out Satan. He's divided against himself. So his own kingdom will not survive, as we see right here in Matthew 12 and 26 in the NLT. And, the average Joe Schmo Edomite, they're looking at this from the perspective of, we no longer have Europe. Massive waves of Elamites, Hamites, Ishmaelites, along with Israelites who were already there, are basically able to out-reproduce and outvote them. So America is their last stand. And, like I said, this Joe Schmo Edomite is not going to just lay down and allow this particular land here that they've convinced themselves is theirs, going back to manifest destiny. They're not going to just let this land here be taken like the UK, France, and, large parts of Germany. These particular crackers over here, they're going to eventually put up a fight. And, it's going to be real bloody. So here's your next civil war. A lot of Edomites in the military, and this is of all ranks. This is of all branches of the military. And this is, throughout all file and rank here. Edomites in the military, they're not going to turn their guns on their fellow white civilians in arms, especially when they realize what this war is about. Eventually, there'll be sedition within the military ranks. This will include generals. This will include, doesn't matter what rank of general, like I said, whether it's brigadier, major, lieutenant general, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is going to be full bird colonels, captains, second, first lieutenants, majors, E8s, E7s, E6s. These particular Edomites in the military, they're not going to turn their guns on their fellow civilians, white civilians in arms. It's going to be the same thing with law enforcement. They're not going to do that. And that's the reason why we saw scores of military-aged men allowed to just come into this country over the previous 4 years. This country has already been preparing this. For 4 years, if you was keeping up with it, you saw video footage after video footage, aerial footage, people on the ground. You're literally seeing tens of thousands of people coming across that border every single day for 4 years. So they don't know how many actually came in. I've seen numbers as low as 8 million. I've seen numbers as high as 30 million. But these were primarily military aged men who were coming across the border. Very rarely were you actually seeing women and children coming across that border. I was in the military myself. I was in the Air Force from 1999 to 2003. And there was something that everyone in the military understands. When a man leaves his country, or when a man flees his country and he takes his family with him, he's just seeking refuge for him and his family. When a man leaves his country and does not take his family with him, that man is on his way to war. And that's what we saw here for the previous 4 years. We saw tens of thousands of people, military age men, every day for 4 years coming across that border. So they were already preparing for this. They already know what's brewing, what's happening. And these people that were coming across, who were being put in hotels, they were being put in these lavish hotels and stuff like that. They were given 3 meals a day. That was a military coming over. That was some type of, maybe, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, but possibly UN so-called peacekeepers. This was foreign troops coming over here who will eventually be used to fight in a civil war and or to restore order. So, you know, you're gonna have a lot of Jakes actually too. Judah and Reuben in particular, who are in the military and also just civilians, they're gonna actually side with Esau Edom. A lot of Jake, and you see it all over social media, especially Twitter and TikTok. You got a lot of Jakes, who actually feel that, their ancestors built this country, and they've contributed to whatever little good in Babylon has to, whatever little good Babylon has to offer. They feel that their ancestors are the reason for that. They're very patriotic. They brag about fighting in every war for this country. They brag about, being the most patriotic, so you see it all the time, man. These guys are going to actually side with Esau because they feel that, hey, it's us. We got to learn to work together here as countrymen, and we're going to be against all of these foreign invaders here coming in. These people, man, they don't understand the scriptures. You know, Before I came into the truth and I used to see that, I used to get kind of frustrated with that kind of belief. But as I've gotten into the truth, I've learned to just don't even really deal with it, man. They're 2/3. And like I said, they don't understand the scriptures. So I'll go to Ecclesiasticus chapter 12, and I'll start from verses 10 and read down to verse 12. Never trust thine enemy, for like as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness. Though he humble himself and go crouching, yet take good heed and beware of him. And thou shalt be unto him as if thou hast wiped a looking glass, and thou shalt know that his rust has not been altogether wiped away. Set him not by thee, lest when he hath overthrown thee, he stand up in thy place. Neither let him sit at thy right hand, lest he seek to take thy seat. And thou at the last remember my words and be pricked therewith. So basically what this is saying is, Jake is going to sit here, Judah and Reuben in particular, who were in the military. They're going to get caught up in the, hey, we got to stick together. We got to fight these foreign invaders. This is our land. We got to put our differences aside. And, right now, so-called white man in this country, they understand what's happening. As you saw the video that I played at the beginning, basically that gentleman was saying, there needs to be an ethnic cleansing here. What you think he's thinking he's going to ethnically cleanse everybody else, but okay, these are the so-called black Americans. They cool with us. No, man, he's like it says right here. Though he humble himself and go crouching, yet take good heed and beware of him. They're not thinking like that. Jake might can convince himself that, okay, these are our countrymen. We have a common cause here in this struggle. We got to stick together. But when it's all said and done, even if they were to win, even if you were to win that, they would eventually turn on you for fear that, well, these guys got way too many guns now. We got to eventually, put them back in their place before they eventually rise up on us. That's how they would be thinking, So let's let's go down to verse 16 here. I'll read 16 through 18. An enemy speaketh sweetly with his lips, but in his heart he imagineth how to throw thee into a pit. He will wipe his eyes, but if he find opportunity, he will not be satisfied with blood. If adversity come upon thee, thou shalt find him there first, and though he pretend to help thee, yet shall he undermine thee. He will shake his head and clap his hands and whisper much and change his countenance. Exactly. So, like I was just saying, if you think these guys, y'all, even if y'all was to win that, they would eventually turn on you. They're not going to, they've never shared power with you. They've never wanted to share this land with you. You're just a burden now. They feel that, okay, well, we can't deport them. We can't get rid of them. So we're going to have to just learn to live here with them. They've never wanted that. They've never wanted peace with you. But a lot of Jakes are going to get caught up in that. Judah and Reuben in particular. And I know that Reuben is part of the northern tribes and Jake is southern. But, Judah, Reuben, and Gad, to a degree, have kind of gotten put into the one big nigger category in this country. There's a lot of Gadites in this country who know they were stripped of their tribal names, and they had to classify themselves as Negro or face 1 to 5 years imprisonment. So a lot of Judah, Reuben, and Gad, even though it's two different kingdoms there, they've been classified as Black Americans now, the one big nigga. So, you're going to see a lot of this, so we just have to understand that, once we look at when this thing goes down, a lot of so-called Black Americans are going to get caught up in that, feeling like they're patriotic and it's their ancestral duty to, stand 10 toes down on the way that their ancestors would have fought. And they're going to be on the wrong side of history. So, you just can't trust these dudes. You cannot trust your enemy. As the scripture says, once again, Ecclesiasticus 12:10, never trust thine enemy, for like as iron rusteth, so is his wickedness. But then you also got to factor in, you got some Jakes who are supposedly even in this truth here, who just can't wrap their minds around the scriptures, and saying that Esau, Edom is going to fall. He's going into hardcore captivity. There's no salvation for Edom. When you say that, these niggas get real irate. What you mean Esau, Edom is going into slavery? That's a dummy doctrine. That's what they say. It's a dummy doctrine. What you talking about? Esau ain't gonna live it up. Esau ain't gonna live it up like us in the kingdom. That's the type of stuff they be saying, man. They be wondering, like, these dudes just can't picture a world without the so-called white man. That idea just breaks their hearts. So, and it's frustrating because these are the ones who are supposed to be in the truth, and it's like here we are praying every fucking day for this place to fall, for this shit to collapse, for this entire system to just go under. And you got these dudes running around telling us that we need to love the very people who are trying to uphold this kingdom. You got these crackers running around saying, build back better, make Babylon great again, build back better. We're praying for the destruction of this place. And you have these Jakes who are supposedly in the truth, simultaneously telling us as we're praying for this place to be destroyed so that a more righteous kingdom, the kingdom of Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai, can be established. They're running around telling us we need to love these people. But it is what it is. I'm not going to go off on a tangent there. Let's get back into the actual video topic. Let's go to Isaiah 19:2. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight every one against his brother, and every one against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And that's the pieces. The pieces on the chessboard are already in position. You know, Esau Edom is basically, as we saw in that video, they're going to be against everybody. You know, Esau Edom feels like, yo, we don't need anybody. We got more guns than everybody. You know, and I can attest to that, man. When, you know, I lived in the South. My father's family is from South Carolina, so I'm very familiar with Southern culture, especially the Low Country. And I lived in Georgia for 14 years, and it's a very common thing, you know, to see. You know, you go down south, and those large containers that, you know, those large shipping containers, you know, it's a common thing to see a white guy have one of those buried in his backyard. Like he literally had a uh a, a tractor trailer, or, you know, something coming in and dig out all of that dirt and would have that lowered into the ground. And you walk into that thing and it's a room full of just nothing but guns and ammo in there. You know, so Esau Edom is going. They feel like we don't need nobody's help. We'll handle. We'll take care now. Whatever simple-minded Jake that helps them to achieve this goal of you know, they'll take that. But when it's all said and done, you know, they're going to turn on you as well. So Esau Edom is going to be against everybody. You know, he's worried about his own survival at this point, his own genetic survival at this point, especially with them feeling like they've already lost Europe. You know, Ishmael is against everybody. And that's pursuant to scripture. You know, you go into Genesis chapter 16, 11, and 12, and the angel also said, you are now pregnant and will give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, which means God hears, for Yahweh has heard your cry of distress. This son of yours will be a wild man, as untamed as a wild donkey. He will raise his fist against everyone, and everyone will be against him. Yes, he will live in open hostility against all his relatives. You know, so we see that now. You know, Ishmael is not even hiding it. You know, I came across, well, I see this type of stuff every day, but for right now, I'll just go into a actual AI overview here. This is Google AI overview, and I looked up the term globalize the intifada. So is a globalize the intifada is a pro-Palestinian slogan calling for worldwide aggressive resistance against Israel, interpreted by many as inciting violence against Jews and Israeli supporters, drawing on the Arabic word for uprising, intifada, historically linked to violent Palestinian rebellions, though some proponents frame it as a broader activism like boycotts and civil disobedience. And let's also look at another thing here that I had to go to Google AI overview for. Wrong. So, Muslim Caliphate. A caliphate is a form of Islamic government that compromises the Muslim community, known as an ummah, and the lands under its dominion, ruled by a leader known as a caliph. The term caliph comes from the Arabic word khalifa, meaning successor or deputy, referring to the successor of the Prophet Muhammad as the religious and political head of Islam. So, what you're seeing right now all across Europe, it's already happened in, you know, North Africa, you know. So what you're seeing now across all of Europe and even now parts of the US is these guys here are setting up their religious places of worship, mosques. They're setting those up everywhere. You're hearing in certain cities the Muslim call to prayer 5 times a day. They're standing out in the middle of Times Square, like by the thousands out there, just all, instead of going to the mosque to hold their religious ceremony or whatever it is that they're doing, their worship, they're outside doing that. And that's a show of force. You know, that's literally to say this is a show of force and you can't do anything about it. You know, so this is Ishmael right there. Ishmael is on the move. Then we got to look at Elam. Elam is starting to rebel against Edom here, right here in Babylon. You know, you're seeing more and more these Elamites are getting tired of Edom, you know, talking about, hey, get rid of these H-1 visas, send these guys back to their own country. So basically, Edom is pissed off mad because he feels like not only have we lost Europe, but now we're losing the U.S. as well. And then you have Moab, you know, Moab is still here, and Moab is even getting more bold, you know. So I typed in CCP flags, Chinese Communist Party flags being flown in America. It was something I've been seeing a lot lately. In 2025 and 2026, the flying of People's Republic of China (PRC) flag, often associated with the Chinese Communist Party, at official and private American sites, has sparked significant and public political debate. So here you have a communist nation actually waving its flags here in a so-called democracy, and they're waving it proudly. You know, last year there was some protest. I want to say last year around the spring, and you may have had about 2 or 3 thousand, Moabites out there in California, and you saw nothing but CCP flags being flown. So when you got other people flying their flags, your enemies at that, in your country, this is a sign. First of all, you're already losing your women. You know, white women are pretty much dating, marrying, and having babies with not just the 12 tribes, but a lot of white women are liking these Elamites as well. They're marrying Elamite men. So not only are you losing your woman, you're also looking at a country now where people are just flying flags all over the place. This is look at this. Philadelphia plans to raise the Chinese flag in a bizarre, I'm not going to click into that. I don't want to get too off a topic, but I'm just showing you. And I remember, man, also, you know, when I was looking at all of those, that video footage of people coming across the border, you would see like Venezuelans coming in, and bam, they'll plant this huge Venezuelan flag right there in Texas, right there in the ground. They just planted the flag. Somalia. When Ilhan Omar was, at one of her campaign rallies, all you saw was Somali flags all over the place. So even Somalia, the state of Minnesota itself changed its flag to resemble the Somali flag. So everyone is proudly waving their flags in Esau's face right now. And this is making Esau feel a certain type of way. Incidentally, about Somalia, we're seeing a network of fraud by the billions with a B across Minnesota and Ohio. There's some type of daycare scams going on, welfare fraud and scams going on. You got healthcare scams and frauds going on. There's no telling what else. So, we're seeing all of these scams, even potentially in Boston and Maine, where there's large populations. Boston, I don't think, has a very large population, but Maine actually has Somali politicians all throughout that state now. So this isn't accidental as well. These scams by the billions, Babylon needs this to happen. Don't get it twisted. Babylon needs this to happen. They need this type of welfare fraud. They need this type of, people lying, saying that they're setting up daycares, or they're setting up some type of housing, but it's really, the state is sending them billions of dollars, and they're sending this money back to Somalia. This country needs that to happen. This hasn't been going on for years, and there's never been an audit, and no one has ever seen that. No one has ever caught that. This country needs that to happen in order for them to eventually propose and impose whatever draconian laws that are going to come out of this. So if it was just one family or just a few individuals involved, all you really could do is just prosecute and jail, and depending on, citizenship status, obviously maybe deport if it was just one or two families involved. But this Somali thing here, this is whole communities across different states. This is an entire network where billions are being sent to Somalia and also used to fund their political candidates right here. So because this is a complex scheme involving entire communities here, this is a multi-billion-dollar excuse that they need. This is the multi-billion-dollar excuse that they need to actually bring in that digital ID and ultimately the RFID micro C-HIP, which is the mark of the beast. This will allow them to say See, now we can track all that taxpayer money and see exactly how it's being used. So we understand this. This isn't some, you know, outlandish or some crazy idea here. We understand that this country, this didn't just go past. This just this doesn't happen for the past 6 7 years, and you're just now uncovering this. This was already seen, but now you have the excuse that you need to eventually implement this digital ID, which will eventually lead to the MOTB, which is the RFID micro C-hip. So let's get that scripture actually. How we are not, we understand, 2 Corinthians 2:11. Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. And I'll also read that in the NLT, so that Satan will not outsmart us, for we are familiar with his evil schemes. We understand what Babylon is doing here. That type of money does not fly under the radar. No one steals upwards of $24 billion, and no one here knew what was going on. They knew this, but this is how they're going to eventually usher in the digital ID and RFID micro C-hip. When all of this starts to go down, they'll need a way. They'll need a way to restore order, and that's how it's going to be. So I'll go into an article I came across here. And this is off of onenews.co.nz. Zohran Mamdani sworn in as New York City mayor. And this particular article doesn't give a date. Maybe it does, but there's so many pop-ups that came up. But this was obviously recently, because I believe this was just yesterday that he was sworn in, or possibly earlier this morning. So Zohran Mamdani became mayor of New York City, taking over one of the most unrelenting jobs in American politics, with a promise to transform government on behalf of the city's striving, struggling working class. So basically, and he was also sworn in on the Quran, which is his faith. So generally, the candidates would get sworn in on a Bible, but he was sworn in on a Quran. So I'm not going to read this entire article here. I'll try to get some key points. Beginning today, we will govern expansively and audaciously. We may not always succeed, but never will we be accused of lacking the courage to try, Mamdani told a cheering crowd. Now, I came across an actual video earlier, and it didn't dawn on me to try to save that video when I was preparing this here. But he actually said it. He said, "I am a socialist Democrat, and I am going to govern like a socialist Democrat." So, which is, we know that this country prides itself on capitalism, and democracy and socialism and communism kind of go against that. So, and this is all being set up, so you got Trump that took office last year. Trump is a huge capitalist. You have a guy that just moved to this country just 7 years ago, and now he's the mayor of the largest or the most heavily populated city in the country, the financial district of the world, and he's a Democrat socialist. So all of, like I said, the pieces are being moved on the chessboard. You can see the clashes about to take place here. Whatever funding this guy needs for anything, I truly doubt Nero is going to give him any type of federal funding unless Mamdani bows down and kisses the ring, so to speak. So I want to also go into something here. Albert Pike was a high-ranking Freemason, and he made a statement about the Third World War. And he basically says the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantages of the differences caused by the agent or the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world, The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and the political Zionism, the state of Israel, this is long before Israel became a state, so they already knew that they were planning on making this a state, but they must mutually destroy each other. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because when you're seeing this rise of Islam in this particular country, this is a threat to this country. Don't let it, don't let it fool you. This is a threat here. And this is why it was allowed to happen. So, but, this is just what Albert Pike said. Now, we ultimately know that the Most High, Yahweh Bashem and Yahweh Shai, is directing all of this. He's the one moving all the pieces on this chessboard. This is his show, and he chooses whomever he's going to choose. So with this guy making that statement about, Islam is going to play a major role in the start of World War III, and then you're looking at Europe, there's Islamic politicians all throughout Europe now. Arab Muslims are pretty much ruling Europe. And this is something that, that J.D. Vance was actually nervous about. A few months back, J.D. Vance made a statement stating, we got to keep an eye on Europe. We got Muslims now that are going to have, once they gain a lot of control, and if they actually take, head leadership positions there, those European countries have nukes. So you really don't want too many of these guys running around, with their hand on that type of access to nuclear weapons. So don't think this thing has them spooked right now. And you're looking now at this country, like I said, you got Maine, New York, Dearborn, Michigan, if I'm correct, Minnesota. Now they're even down south. They're in parts of Texas, Tampa Bay, Florida, if I'm correct. So they've even gotten down to the Bible Belt states, even in Georgia. The upcoming elections in Georgia. There's I saw 5 or 6 Muslims that's all running for office. This is in Georgia. So, and these are not American, Nation of Islam niggas. This is actual Arab Muslims. So they've gained a foothold here. And, this country has a serious choice to make here. If they want to, at the very least, delay it, because you're not going to stop biblical prophecy. So with this guy here, Albert Pike, making this comment about World War III, like I said, we know that this is ultimately the Most High show. So the Most High basically chose this guy to bring that to light. Like, this is what's going to happen. But we know that the Most High has already planned all of this from the beginning anyway. But he just used this guy, Albert Pike, to, pretty much expose or bring to light how, World War III is going to get started here. And it's going to be a war between, or at least it's going to get started between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world, in such a way that Islam and the political Zionists, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. And of course, Russia is going to play a huge part in that as well, as pursuant to Ezekiel chapter 38. So let's look at Isaiah 45:7. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. So we know that, once again, this guy, Albert Pike, yes, he said what he said back in around 1870, if I'm correct, but that's the Most High, using him. That's the left-hand side, basically, and that's the Most High choosing him to fulfill his plans, to fulfill his will, and to not just fulfill it, but to show everyone this is how it's going to go down. And we're seeing it playing out right here in Babylon as we speak. So let's look at Isaiah 55:9. That just came to mind real quick. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So basically the Most High is sovereign. It doesn't matter who he uses to, fulfill his will or to make his plans come to light. The Most High is sovereign. He's going to use whoever he wants to use, and he's going to put it out there that that's what I'm doing, because he's the Most High. That's why he is the most high. Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So let's um let's go back to my initial scripture, which was Matthew 12:25. I'll read it in NLT this time. Yahweh Shai knew their thoughts and replied, any kingdom divided by civil war is doomed. A town or family splintered by feuding will fall apart. And if Satan is casting out Satan, he is divided and fighting against himself. His own kingdom will not survive. So we're looking forward to this. This civil war that's brewing here right now in Babylon the Great. We're looking forward to this. We understand this has to happen. Babylon has to fall, man. This shit got to go. This country was built on land theft, genocide, slavery, and the exploitation of the tribes, and it hasn't stopped. You know, particularly with Judah. These niggas got a real gripe with Judah. So people are always telling Judah, oh, y'all need to get over slavery. But it's like every 10 years, these devils release another damn blockbuster movie showing Judah men being beaten, showing Judah women being raped. Just all kind of crazy shit. So like mentally, that shit eventually takes a toll on you. When you constantly keep seeing that type of imagery, you constantly keep seeing that, it eventually does something to your mind, to your spirit. It can bring you down. So yeah, these dudes are still making tens of millions of dollars off of this country's history of chattel slavery. And that's just off the Hollywood entertainment industry. That's just we'll come out with Roots. After that, then we'll come out with some other shit. Just every 10 years there's something new. If you go back to the Odyssey of Solomon Northrop, that was just a few years right after Roots. Then it's just constant. It doesn't stop. Then you come out with at least Glory tried to show them in a little bit of with some dignity, but there's just it's always like that. They're still making this type of money, and it's not just that. These are the Amalek, and to a degree now, if you really look at the rolling credits, you'll see a lot of Elamites as well. The funny thing about this, if you look at any slave movie now, right? If you go to the movies and you look at a slave movie regarding Judah, if you look real carefully at the background slaves, maybe not the main character, obviously, but the background slaves, they got their hair cut low. Those are Elamites. So you're not even allowing Judah to even play himself as a slave in these movies. So even Elam now has his hand in getting, they're profiting off of this. You understand what I'm saying? They're making money off of this. Like everybody can come here and make money off of Judah's pain, off of Judah's punishment in this country, And so you got to eventually ask, when does it stop, man? Damn. And it's like, let's look at Zechariah 1:15, right? Zechariah 1:15. And I am very sore displeased with the heathen, that they are at ease, for I was but a little displeased, and they helped forward the affliction. I'll read that as well in the NLT, but I am very angry with the other nations that are now enjoying peace and security. I was only a little angry with my people, but the nations inflicted harm on them far beyond my intentions. So yeah, it's like I was saying, it's like, it never stops, particularly with Judah. They constantly fuck with Judah all the time, so this is why Judah's gotten to the point where a lot of Judahites right now have basically said, fuck it. We ain't marching for nobody. We ain't going on the back. We don't care who you deport. That's how Judah is basically kind of like at that point now where it looks like they're becoming disenfranchised with this entire system, which is actually a good thing. Even though they are part of the 2/3, the Most High is kind of starting. Looks like he's putting the spirit on Judah to basically say, "The hell with this place, fuck this." So it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, though, regarding you're gonna have some idiot Judites though when this civil war pops off. they're going to get caught up in the patriotism of it. We got to fight with our countrymen. Yeah, these might be the guys that was stringing us up on trees and raping and brutalizing us and raping our women, but they're still our countrymen and we got to fight. Nah, stay away from that, but you're going to get caught up in the Most High's indignation. You're going to get really fucked up bad. So with that being said, I'll end the video right there. I do pray that this has been edifying and reaches the ears it's supposed to reach. Shalom.